initials RBG. Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her initial
also known by her initials
RBG,
RBG,
was the second woman
ever
to become a
to become
U.S.
U.S.
Supreme Court Justice.
Supreme Justice.
A Supreme Court
A Supreme
Justice is a
Justice.
judge who works in
This judge who works is
the highest court of law
a higher choice law
in the U.S.
in the U.S.
Her job, along with
Her job allows his work.
her seven other colleagues, was to ensure fair
ensure the defense
and just law
as
for the entire
prosperity in United States
and all the people
and all the people.
living in it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
was born on the 15th of
was born on 15th
March
of 1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended
She is attending Cornell
University for her bachelor's
University in Ashley.
degree. After
graduating,
she went on to
she went on to
Harvard Law School,
Law School,
where she was one of the
one to be
only women in
only women
her
entire class.
During her time in law school, she left Harvard and transferred to Columbia
and transferred for Columbia Law School
to be with her husband.
to be for an Austin.
After transferring,
her husband became
ill with cancer.
cancer.
Ruth went to his class
Ruth organized his class
and took
session
notes for him,
to take notes for him,
typed his papers,
protect the people,
all while taking her
own classes,
caring
caring for him,
and caring for their young daughter.
and their young daughter.
After graduating first in her class,
After graduating first in her class,
she became a professor.
she became a
Was
professor,
one of the few women in her
and in game is one few minutes in the
field.
field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a Supreme Court
she began coaching in a Supreme Court justice.
She spent her entire
She spent her entire
career fighting for
women's rights.
She helped create laws
We have racist law.
that support women
And support women
and help their fight for equality. RBG sadly passed away
to
cancer
cancer
on
September 18, 2020 in your home.
Although many people
Were broken
were
by
broken by her
death.
she will forever be considered a hero
She was a behavioral and a hero
of
human rights
and women's equality.
and women's equality.
Ruth
Ruth Bader
Ginsburg, also known by her initials
also known by her initial RBG,
was the second woman
ever to become
a U.S.
a U.S.
Supreme Court Justice.
The Supreme Court Justice.
A Supreme Court justice is
A Supreme Court Justice is
the judge
the judge
who works in the highest court
who was the highest court
of law in the U.S.
of laws in the U.S.
Her job,
Her job, along
along with her 7 other
with her son
colleagues,
colleague,
was to ensure fair
which to ensure and fair
and just laws
and just law
for the entire United States
in the entire United States
and all the people
and all the people
living in it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was
born on the 15th of
born on the 15th
March 1933
is March 1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is studying Cornell
University for her bachelor's
University in a
degree.
degree.
After graduating,
After graduation,
she went on to Harvard Law School.
she went on to Harvard Law School,
She was one of the
where she was the heart of being
only women
only women
in
in
her
her entire class.
During her time in law school,
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard
Wallace Thomas
and transferred to
and transferred to
Columbia Law School to be with
Columbia
her
Law School
husband.
and husband
After transferring,
as hampering.
her
Her husband became
ill with cancer.
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his
Ruth went his
classes and took notes for him, typed his papers,
type to paper,
all while taking her
all while taking her
own classes.
own classic.
Caring for him
Caring for him
and caring for their
and caring for him
young daughter.
and young daughter.
After graduating first in her class,
After graduating in her and class,
became a professor.
she trained in the professor. Yeah.
Was one of the few women
And again, it's the real women in her field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a
she began working in a
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
He spent her
He spent her
entire career
entire career
fighting for women's rights.
fighting for women's rights.
She helped create laws
She helped raise laws
and support women
and
and help their
friends
fight for equality.
for equality. RBG sadly
passed away from
cancer
on September
8,
2020 in
2020
her own home.
in her own home.
Although many people
All her people
were broken-hearted
were broken
by her death,
by your death.
she will forever
She would be ever
be considered a
be considered a
hero of
human rights
and women's equality.
and women's equality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her
also known by her
initials
initials
RBG,
RBGs,
was the second woman
ever to become a U.S.
Supreme Court justice.
and the Supreme Court Justice.
A Supreme Court justice
As the Supreme Court Justice
is a judge who
is the judge
works in the highest court
who worked in the highest honor
of law in the U.S.
in the U.S.
Her job,
Her job,
along with her
chef
and other colleagues,
and a colleague,
was to ensure fair
was to ensure in a shame
and just laws
and just laws
for the entire United
and an entire United
States,
States,
all the people living
in it.
Ruth Bader
Ruth Bader
Ginsburg was born on the 15th
was born on the
of March
15th of March
1933
1393
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is studying in Cornell University
for her bachelor's
for her bachelor.
degree. After graduating,
After graduating,
she went on to
she went on to start
a Harvard Law School,
a Harvard Law School,
where she was one of the
where she was living on
only women
only women
in
in
her
her entire class.
During her time in
in
law school, she left Harvard
and
transferred
transferred to Columbia.
Law School to
Law
be
School
with her husband.
to be her husband.
After
After transferring,
her husband
began
ill with cancer.
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes
Ruth was in hospital,
and took notes for him,
took notes for him,
typed his papers,
type of paper,
all while taking her
own classes,
caring for him
caring for him,
and caring for their young
and caring for the young daughter.
After graduation,
First in her
class,
class,
she became a professor,
she became a professor,
and
and again
was one of the
was in the field
few
women.
in her field. In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a
she began working in a
Supreme Court justice. She spent her entire career
she princess entire respect trends
fighting for women's rights.
for women's rights.
She helped create laws
She had created laws
that support women
and support women
and help their fight for
and help a die women
equality.
glory.
RBG
RBG
sadly passed away
from cancer on
September 18,
September 18,
2020
2020
in
in your own home.
Although many people
Although many people
were brokenhearted
were broken both in
by
her
her
death,
death, she will forever be considered a hero of human rights and women's equality.
and women has equality.
Ruth Bader
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her initials
also known by her initials
RBG,
RBG,
was the second woman
ever to become
a
a U.S.
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court justice.
A Supreme Court justice
As the Supreme Justice
is a judge who
is a judge
works in the highest court
who was in the highest court
of law in the U.S.
of law in the U.S.
Her job,
Her job,
along with her 7 other colleagues,
along with her friend and having colleague,
was to ensure fair
with certain and fair
and just laws for the
and just law for the
entire United States
United States
and all the people living in it.
and all the people living in it.
Ruth Bader
Ruth Bader
Ginsburg was born on the
Ginsburg is born in her
15th of March
15th of March
1933
in 1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is studying Cornell
University
University for a bachelor's degree.
After graduating,
After graduation,
she went on to
she was at the Harvard
Harvard Law School,
Law School,
where she was one of
where she was one of the
the
only
women
women
in her entire
in entire class.
During her time in
During her time in
law school, she left Harvard
and she lost honor
and transferred to Columbia
and studied in Columbia
Law School.
Law School.
To be with her husband.
To be with her husband.
After transferring, her
After
husband
transferring,
became ill with cancer.
it can have to be in cancer.
Ruth went to his class.
Ruth went to his class
Took notes for him.
to note for him, typed
his
his paper,
all while taking her
her
own
own classes,
caring for him, and caring for their young daughter.
on Terran, a young daughter.
After graduating,
After graduation,
first
first in a class,
she became a professor.
she became an professor,
And again,
and again
was one of the few
was woman and a few
women in her
women
field.
in her field.
In
In 1993,
she began working as a Supreme
she became instructor in three
Court justice.
in Colchester.
She spent her
He spent her entire career
fighting for
fighting for women's rights.
She helped create laws that
She had British law
support women
to support women,
and help their fight for equality.
their glory.
RBG sadly
RBG
passed
passed
away
away from
cancer
cancer
on September 18,
on September 18,
2020 in
2020,
her own home.
her own home.
Although many people
Were
brokenhearted by her
were broken past in her death,
she will forever be
she will say, how we can be
considered a hero of human rights
in heroes, hearing rights,
and women's equality.
and women equality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also
known by her
initials
original
RBG,
RBG,
was the second woman ever to become a U.S.
Supreme Court
Justice.
Justice.
A Supreme Court Justice
A Supreme Court
Justice
Justice
is a judge
is the judge
who works in the highest
who was in the highest
court of law in
court of laws
the U.S.
in the US.
Her job, along with
Her job, along with her
her 7 other colleagues,
700 colleagues,
was to ensure
was to ensure
fair and
fair
just laws
and just laws
for the entire
to the entire
United States
and all
the people living in
the people living there.
it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Ginsburg was born on
on
the 15th of March,
the 15th of March
1933
1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is attending Cornell University
University for her bachelor's.
for a bachelor.
After graduating, she
After graduation, she was
went on to
Harvard
Law School,
Law School
where she was one of the only women in her entire class.
in her entire class.
During her time in law school,
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard and transferred to Columbia
he lectured in Columbia
Law School
Law School
to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her husband became
her husband became
ill with cancer.
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes
Ruth went to his classes,
and took notes for him,
took notes for him,
typed his papers,
typed the paper,
all while taking her own classes, caring for him,
all while taking for classes, taking your him,
and caring for their young
and caring for the young
daughter.
daughter.
After graduating,
After graduation,
first in her class, she became a professor,
she became to a pastor,
and again
again
was one of the
was one in a few
few women in her
women's honor
field.
field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a
she became was in a
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court justice.
She spent her entire
His brightest in time
career fighting for
career fighting towards
women's rights.
in tribe.
She helped create laws
She helped preach its law
that support women
and support women
and help their fight
and have their fight
for equality.
for equality.
RBG
RBG sadly
passed
passed away
from cancer
from cancer
on September 18th,
on September 18,
2020 in her
2020 at her
own home.
own home.
Although many people were brokenhearted
Although many people swore in broken heat
by her death,
she
she will forever be
was offered big vacancy
considered a hero of
that her hero
human rights
and rights
and women's equality.
as means that bloody.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by
her
her
initial
RBG,
RBGs,
was the second woman
and
ever to become a U.S.
ever to become a U.S.
Supreme Court
Supreme Court justice.
justice. A Supreme Court
A Supreme Court justice
justice is a judge
is a judge
who works in the highest
who was in the highest
court of law
in laws
U.S.
in the U.S.
Her job,
Her job,
along with her
along with the seven
other colleagues,
other colleagues,
was to ensure fair
which ensure is fair
and just laws for the
and just law in the
entire United States
entire United States
and all the people
and all the people
living
live in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
was born on the 15th of March
was born on the 15th with birth
1933
in 1923
in Brooklyn, New York.
in New York.
She attended Cornell
She studied in Toronto
University for her bachelor's degree. After graduating,
After graduation, she went on to
Harvard Law School,
Harvard Law School
where she was one of the only women in her entire class. During her time in law school, she left Harvard
she left us
and transferred to Columbia
and transferred to Columbia
Law School
Law School
to be with her husband.
to speak in her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her husband became
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes,
Ruth was in classes
took notes for him,
to snow for him,
typed his papers,
that's stupid,
all while taking her own classes,
all while taking her own classes,
caring for him, and caring for their young daughter.
and caring for the young daughter.
After graduating
After graduating
first
in her class,
she became a professor,
she became a professor
and again was one of the few women
and became one of few
in her field.
women in the field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a Supreme Court
she became a Supreme and
justice.
justice.
She spent her
entire
career
fighting
for women's rights.
for it in time.
She helped create laws
She helped create laws
that
to support women
and help their fight for equality.
and help their fight equality.
RBG sadly passed away from cancer
RBG sadly was replaced on cancer and in September
18, 2020 in her own home.
home.
Although many were
broken
hearted by her
death,
she will forever be considered a
it was never concealed.
hero of human rights
Hero can visit life
and women's equality.
and women's equality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her initials RBG, was the second woman
ever to become with
U.S.
U.S. Supreme
Court Justice.
Court Justice.
A Supreme Court Justice
A Supreme Court Justice
is a judge who
is the judge
works in the highest court of law in the U.S. Her job, along with her seven other colleagues, was to ensure fair
and
just laws for the
entire United
States
States
and all the people living
in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
born on the
born on the
15th of March
1933
in Brooklyn, New York. She attended Cornell
University
for her bachelor's
for a bachelor's
degree.
degree.
After graduating,
After graduation,
she went on to Harvard
she went on to Harvard
Law School,
Law School,
where she was one of the only
while she along with the only women in her
entire
entire class.
class. During her time in law school,
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard
she left Doris
and transferred to Columbia
and transferred for Columbia Law School
to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her husband became ill
her husband became ill
with cancer.
with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes,
Ruth went to his classes,
took notes for him,
took notes for him,
typed his papers,
typed to paper,
all while taking her own
classes,
caring for him
to caring for him
and caring for their young daughter.
and caring for the young daughter.
After graduating
After graduation,
first in her class,
first in the class,
she became a professor
she began to presenter,
and again
and again
was one of the few
was one in the field
women in her
minutes
field.
for a field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a
she began in here
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
She spent her
He spent her until
entire career
entire career
fighting for women's
fighting for women's rights.
She helped create laws
She had precised laws
that support women
that support women
and help their fight for
and have their fight for
equality.
equality.
RBG
RBG sadly
passed
passed
away
away
from cancer on
from cancer on
September 18th,
September 18,
2020 in her
2020 at her
own home.
own home.
Although many people were broken-hearted by
Broken hearted by
her death,
her death,
she will forever be
she was the ever be
considered a hero
considered a hero
of
human rights
and women's equality.
and women's equality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known
known
by her initials
by her initial
RBG,
RBGs,
was the second woman ever to
was the second woman ever
become a U.S.
U.S.
Supreme Court Justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
A Supreme Court Justice
A Supreme Court Justice
is a judge who works
is a judge who works
in the highest
higher
court of law
in
in the U.S.
the U.S.
Her job,
Her job along
with her 7 other
a lot of which a fellow colleagues
was to ensure fair
was doing us fair
and just laws for
and just laws
the entire
for entire
United States
States
and all the people living
and all the people live
in
in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was
Ruth
born
Bader Ginsburg was born
on the 15th of
on the 15th of
March
March 1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She studied Cornell
University
and has
a bachelor's degree.
a bachelor's degree.
After
After graduation,
she went on to Harvard
she went on to Harvard Law
Law School,
School,
where she was one of the
where she was her only
only
women
her entire
in her entire
class.
class.
During her time in law
During the time in law
school,
school,
she left Harvard
she left Harvard
and transferred to Columbia
and transferred to Columbia
Law School
Law School
to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her husband became
the husband became
ill with cancer. Ruth went to his class
Ruth was in class
and took notes for him,
took notes for him,
typed his
typed paper,
all while taking her own
classes,
caring for him,
caring for him,
and caring for their young daughter.
and caring for the young daughter.
After graduation,
first in her
class, she became a professor.
She became a professor,
And
again
was one of the few
was women in a few
men
minutes
in her field.
of field.
In 1993,
1993,
she began working as a
she became the weapons
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
She spent her entire
Framed her entire
career fighting for
career of fighting
women's rights.
women's rights.
She helped create laws that
She had created law
support women
to support women
and help their fight for equality.
and have their fight equality.
RBG sadly passed
RBG sadly passed
away from cancer
away on cancer
on
September 18, 2020 at her own home. Although many people were
brokenhearted by
her death,
she will forever be considered a
she would always be considered
hero of
hero
human rights
to women's
and women's equality.
and to women's and love. Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her
also known by her
initials
short RBG,
was the second woman
ever
ever
to become a
U.S.
U.S.
Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
A Supreme Court justice
Supreme Court Justice
is a judge who works in the highest court of
law
laws in the U.S.
Her job,
along with seven
along with 7
other
other colleagues,
was to ensure
was to ensure
fair and
fair and just laws
the entire United States
to the entire United States
and all the people living in it.
and all the people living in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
was
born on the
5th
March
with 1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended
She studied Cornell University
for her bachelor's degree.
for a bachelor's degree.
After
After
graduation,
graduation,
she went on to Harvard Law
she was at the Harvard Law School,
where she was one of the
where she was in
only
women
in her
entire class.
During her time in law school,
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard and transferred
he left Harvard and returned
her to Columbia Law School
her to Columbia Law School
to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
As a temporary,
her husband became ill with cancer.
his family became ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his
Ruth at the same time
classes and took notes for him,
to knock for him,
typed his papers,
typed to paper,
all while taking her
own classes,
caring for him,
caring for him,
and caring for their young daughter.
and caring for the young daughter.
After graduating
First in her class,
class, she became a professor,
she became a professor
and again
and began
was one of the few women
in the few
in her
minutes
field.
in her field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she
began
working as a Supreme
working in the Supreme
Court justice.
Court Justice.
She spent her
He spent her
entire
entire career fighting
for women's rights.
women's rights.
She helped create laws
She has written law
that support
that support women
and help their fight for equality.
and help their right equality. RBG sadly passed away
From cancer
from cancer
on September 18th, 2020
by 2016 and
in her own home.
20 in your own home.
Although many people were brokenhearted by her death, she will forever be
she was over 40,
considered a
70s,
hero of human
throwing differences
and women's equality.
and women in bloodies.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also
known by her initials
known by her racial RBG,
was the second woman ever
first to become an U.S.
Supreme Court Justice. A Supreme Court Justice
and the Supreme Court
is a judge who works in
is a judge who was
the highest court of law
a higher court of law
in the U.S. Her job, along with her
allows to judge
and other colleagues, was to ensure fair and just laws for the entire United States and all the people living in it.
and all living in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
was born on the 15th of
was born on the 15th of
March
March
1933
1923
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is studying
Yale
University
for her bachelor's degree.
for its bachelor in history.
After graduation, she went on to Harvard Law School,
She went
where
on
she
to
was
Harvard Law School,
the only women in
and only women
her entire class.
on her entire class.
During her time in law
School,
she left Harvard and
transferred
to
Columbia
Law School
to
be with her husband.
be with her husband.
After transfer,
After transfer,
her husband became
ill
ill
with cancer.
Ruth went to his class
Ruth was in his class,
classes and took
just
notes for him,
enough for him,
typed his papers,
typed the papers,
all while taking her
own classes,
caring for
him,
and caring for their young daughter.
and for a young daughter.
After graduating
first in her
class, she became a professor,
she became a professor,
and
and again
was one of the few women
was one in the field
in her field.
in the field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a Supreme
she began working in a Supreme
Court Justice. She spent her entire career fighting for women's rights. She helped create laws
She has created laws
that support women and
that support women
help their fight for equality.
and help their fight equality.
RBG sadly passed away from
RBG sadly passed away
cancer
from cancer
on
September 8,
18, 2020
1823
in her own home.
in your own home.
Although many people were
Although many
hurted by her death,
broken by her death,
she will forever be
she will able to
considered a hero
and heal
of human rights Re- Remini,
and women's equality.
and women's body.
Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her initials
also known by her initials
RBG,
RBG,
was the second woman ever to become U.S. Supreme Court
a U.S. Supreme Court
Justice.
Justice.
A Supreme Court Justice
A Supreme Court Justice
is a judge
is a judge
who works in the highest court of law in the U.S. Her job, along with her
as a was of chess
and other colleagues,
and colleague
was to ensure fair and
was so interested in fair
just laws for the entire
and just law in the entire United States
and all the people living in
and all the people living in
it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born on the
Ruth Bader Ginsburg 10th of March 1933
in Brooklyn, New York. She attended Cornell University
She is calling Cornell University
for her bachelor's.
for a bachelor.
After graduation,
She
she went on to
Harvard Law School,
where she was
and she lived
one of the
only women in her entire
class.
class.
During her time in law school,
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard
she left Harvard
and transferred to
of
Columbia
Law
School to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her
husband became
ill with cancer.
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes
Ruth went to his classes
and took notes for him,
took notes for him,
typed his papers,
typed the paper,
all while taking her own
classes,
caring for him
caring for him,
and caring for their young daughter.
and caring for the young daughter. After graduation,
first in her class, she became a
professor,
and
and again
was one of the few
was going to few women in her field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began working as a Supreme Court
she began
justice.
working in a French causes.
She spent her entire career
He spent her entire career
fighting for women's
fighting on the
rights.
rights.
She helped create laws
She helped create laws
that support women
to support women
and help their fight for
equality.
RBG
RBG sadly
passed away
from cancer
on September
September 18, 2020
in her
own home.
Although
many people were
broken-hearted
by her death,
she will forever be
considered a
hero
hero
of human rights
of human rights
and women's equality.
and women's equality.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
also known by her initials
RBG,
was the second woman
and the second woman
ever
to become a
U.S.
U.S.
Supreme Court Justice.
Supreme Justice.
A Supreme
A Supreme Court
Court Justice is a
Justice
judge who
is
works
judge who
in
works
the highest court of law
is court of laws
in the U.S.
in the U.S.
Her job, along with her seven other
colleagues,
was to ensure fair
with seven cars and share
and just laws for the
and just law for the entire United States
and all the people living
and all the people living in it.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Ruth Bader Ginsburg
was born on the was born on the 15th of March 1933 in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is attending Cornell University for a bachelor
degree. After graduating,
After graduation,
she went on to
she went on to
Harvard Law School, where she was one of the only
women
in her entire
class.
During her time in law
During her time in law school,
she left Harvard
she left Harvard
and transferred to Columbia
and transferred to Columbia Law School
to be with her husband.
to be with her husband.
After transferring,
After transferring,
her husband became ill
with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes and
Ruth was in classes
took notes for him,
to snow for it,
typed his papers,
typed to paper,
all while taking her
own classes,
caring for
him,
and caring for their young.
and caring for the younger daughter.
After graduating,
After graduation,
first in her class, she became a professor.
She became a professor,
And
and again
was one of the few
was in the field
women in her field. In
1993,
she began working as a
she began talking in the
Supreme Court
Supreme Court Justice.
She spent her entire
He spent her entire
career fighting for
women's rights.
She helped create laws that support women
She helped create laws and support things
and help their fight for equality.
and welfare fight and equality.
RBG sadly passed away from cancer
passed away in cancer
on September
8th, 2020.
in her own home.
In your own home.
Although
many people
were broken hearted
by her death,
she will forever be
considered
human
rights
and
women's equality. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also known by her
initials
racial
RBG,
restraints,
was the second woman ever to become a U.S. Supreme Court Justice.
Supreme Court Justice.
A Supreme Court Justice
And the Supreme Court Justice
is a judge who works in the highest court of law
in the U.S.
Her job, along with
seven
and other
other colleagues
was to ensure
was going to invest
fair and just laws for the
and just law for
entire United States and all the people living in it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born on the 15th of
March
March
1933
in Brooklyn, New York.
in Brooklyn, New York.
She attended Cornell
She is attending Cornell
for
University
her bachelor's
a bachelor
degree.
degree.
After graduating, she went on to Harvard Law School, where she was one of the only women in her entire class. During her time in law school, she left Harvard and transferred to Columbia Law
and the term of Columbia Law
School
School
to be with her husband.
Ruby has lost weight.
After transfer,
After monthly
her husband became
rust and became
ill with cancer.
ill with cancer.
Ruth went to his classes
Ruth and she has lastly
and took notes for him,
does not want
typed his papers,
tattoo papers,
all while taking her own classes,
caring for him,
and caring for their
and caring for
young
the
daughter.
young daughter.
After graduating
After graduation
first
in her class,
she became a professor,
she became a professor,
and
and again
was one of the few women
were women in the few women
in her field.
and her field.
In 1993,
In 1993,
she began
she began work.
working as a Supreme
She began work in the three
Court
trustees.
justice. She spent her
He was sentenced until
entire career fighting for women's rights.
of driving